Welcome back to Forging Alpha. Caleb and Ricky here, and we're happy you're with us.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
What are we talking about today, Caleb?
Today, we're going to talk about men's health, specifically hormonal health, HRT, hormone optimization. I say daily supplementation that each of us do, ways that people can, especially men, can optimize daily processes, especially being professionals, executives, entrepreneurs. What are some of the things that you've seen benefit yourself personally, but then we've obviously been around the industry a little bit and what things work for other people.
Been around the industry for a little bit, yeah. And not to say that the ladies won't get any takeaways from this, but obviously we're only speaking from the male experience, so.
It's all I've ever known.
All we've ever known.
All I ever plan on knowing, too.
Well, you say that now. It is 2024.
We won't get into that, but...
Not yet. Not on today's episode.
Yeah, so, I mean, just kickstarting right off the bat. So you are on TRT, hormone replacement therapy, right?
Yep, so I'm on pellet therapy. I started in November, I believe.
And what has been your experience so far, and why did you take that jump to get it checked out?
Yeah, so when I left the gym space, I had just gotten into some performance enhancing supplements.
Ooh.
And it was not through a doctor. So I was just doing, figuring it out myself, the typical 500 mgs a test. And it was awesome. It was awesome. Strength was like through the roof and everything. I felt great. Added a couple other things in there. But when I ended up coming off everything, I did not do a good job of a PCT or anything like that. At the same time, I also switched to a desk job, stopped going to the gym. Because I stopped going to the gym, the food kind of went with it. So it was like this smorgasbord of things you shouldn't do. All kind of came down at the same time. And part of that was lower testosterone because I just dumped everything that I was taking and I didn't do anything to fix that. So then with the other indicators or other factors going into it that I was also dropping the ball on, my headspace just kind of sucked. I was losing muscle mass, which again, not going to the gym, that's going to happen. And I just didn't have the drive or energy that I used to.
Fair enough. We should probably make a disclaimer on this too. None of this is medical advice. None of this is recommendations for things. We're just talking from experience.
Just chit-chatting from experience for entertainment's sake.
Kind of crazy you got to make that disclaimer today.
Sometimes I wonder, like, on all the financial stuff, when people say this is not financial advice, like, do you have to actually say that?
I think so.
That's crazy.
I think so. We'll get into that topic more about that. Would be a fun topic to talk about. But
yeah, not medical.
We
advice.
just live in a crazy world where if you don't say that and somebody takes something out of context, I think there's just people looking for any excuse they can.
It certainly seems that way.
Yeah.
We'll give you some life advice on a couple things, but no medical advice.
No medical advice, no financial advice.
No MDs here.
Yeah, I've noticed just across the board, whether it's HRT, testosterone replacement therapy, but it seems that it's coming to the forefront more. Knowledge of it, popularity. I think for the better, but also for the worse. Like, I do feel like there are a lot of people that are just maybe looking to TRT or HRT as their midlife crisis. Like, they're not going to go get a Ferrari. TRT is a little bit cheaper. They're going to get jacked. They're going to have whatever the effects that come with that are. Higher energy levels, but that's their first step versus maybe dialing in their lifestyle, the nutrition, the working out, actually getting into the gym. I was listening to a podcast, and he was breaking down the statistics about if you walk into a gym, 1 in 4 guys is probably attempted or is on performance-enhancing drugs at some point. And you'd venture to guess that probably a lot of people are not dialing in everything else along with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so one of the biggest benefits through my eyes going through a actual clinic with somebody that knows what they're talking about. And the reason I throw that part in there are a lot of shady operations that are popping up all over the place. But if you go to somebody that knows what they're talking about, they're going to be able to keep an eye on all those other things other than just your testosterone.
100%. What have been the benefits on this side that you have noticed that you can speak to? Has it been life-changing for you, or is it kind of just slight optimization?
The whole package, life-changing, but I do have a little bit of a tough time differentiating. Like the testosterone, I think, was the catalyst that started the other habits. Like helped have that edge to get back into the gym. And now that I've been back in the gym, putting muscle back on and all that, obviously the testosterone is helping with that. But those habits are just kind of more established also. But I would say like overall, it's been tremendous.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of a cart before the horse or horse before the cart conversation.
There's just so many variables that go into it, right?
Yeah, it's like, is it the thought process that you're doing this so I should take care of all the other variables? Or now are you at a point where it's given you the drive, motivation, and bandwidth to then be able to focus more on things, pursue things? Because, I mean, we've all been there. At some point in life, maybe that was before you were on TRT or even just on a micro scale, like a bad night's worth of sleep.
Yeah.
Like your perspective and able to focus on things outside of just like the immediate to-do list is really small. And I feel like a lot of people who are struggling maybe with hormonal things also don't have that perspective. Like things that might feel easier to you now are maximal effort, maximal brain power just to get those routine things done in a day. And to some extent, life probably, those harder things tend to probably feel a little bit easier once you get there. So it's an interesting, like, are you doing those things because of that? Or did that just did it put you back in the optimal place to function adequately?
Tough to say.
Yeah.
It's tough to say. I wish I had some numbers to go over. I just got blood work yesterday. So on the next podcast, I should have some results back.
Mm-hmm. We'll touch base with that. And obviously from what I do with coaching individuals, and I've stepped more into the space of entrepreneurs and executives, and I really can't personally speak to experience with that. I'm just not at a point where I can justify the jump, or I just haven't taken the jump to TRT.
Yeah.
Doing that, my numbers are still relatively good.
Not with clients, but speaking with yourself.
From personal, yes.
Okay.
But with a coaching standpoint, working with a lot of clients, and I'm connected with the professionals who carry that out. And I've looked at, spent the last couple of years looking at blood work panels. I know what works. I know what moves the needle. I've worked with a lot of clientele. So I can't necessarily speak as much from personal experience, but I know the science behind it. I know the blood work parameters. I know what we're looking at, why things might be optimized a certain way, when the body might respond to lifestyle changes, dietary interventions, even just natural supplementation, and the points of where your body's no longer making its own testosterone. So nothing along the lines of natural supplements, HCG and clomiphene, things like that are kind of precursors to going on full-blown TRT are going to work. Because once you're at a certain point, that's where I think a lot of people get confused or misconstrued is, why don't you just take these natural supplements? Your Tongkat Ali's, your Fedogia Agrestis, and those things might move the needle a little bit. I think that, like for me, I'm still in the 600s. I've fluctuated up 700s with that. And so for me, natural supplementation might give me like a 50, 100-point boost, maybe, if you're doing it consistently. Everything else is dialed in. Is that going to move the needle on substantial amounts of muscle mass? Absolutely not. Anytime, like, this is what I tell guys, is you think you're going to take these natural supplements and it's going to do a ton, it's not. If you are still working within the natural boundaries, you're probably going to get a little more energy, a little more cognition, maybe a little more bump up in the gym, but it's going to do nothing in terms of like muscle building. But if you're taking it outside of, or at the very top range of physiological ranges, maybe like TRT or HRT interventions, there could be some benefit there. But also just looking at, you might benefit from this, you're in a good spot, but also knowing when it's time to implement something in like the HRT or TRT, because there's something along the lines from your brain down to your balls that is off, and you're not going to benefit from the natural supplementation route. Like you can push that upstream button all you want, and not much is going to happen downstream. So, I can speak to that, and I can speak to the experiences that people have had, which tend to be more energy for their family, better performance in the gym. It's not like people are going on IFBB Pro amounts of anabolic steroids. Like TRT is supposed to get you within physiological ranges that you're not in right now, putting you back in a normal range.
And theoretically, still a little bit of a performance enhancement in the sense that your levels will be more stable. Like you could be in the normal range, but there's so many peaks and valleys, especially with like the pellet therapy and things of that nature. Or if you're doing 2 injections a week at least, like keeping that more stable, is super beneficial.
Yeah.
So that if you do have that really crappy night's sleep, it doesn't tank it completely.
That's an interesting conversation too, because when I have conversations with people, clients, just general topics on TRT, that's one of the things that does come up, because when you are natural, quote unquote, you're not on HRT, TRT, you are subject to those peaks and valleys, even just naturally. Your body is going to drop 20-30% in testosterone total postprandially. So after a meal, your testosterone is going to drop down. Doesn't mean long term, but there's always peaks and valleys where a certain point of the day you're going to have a high. Typically in the morning is kind of your peak, and then it's going to start dropping off throughout the course of the day. And when you don't have that peak and valley, there's probably a little bit more in terms of sustained energy and output, I would imagine.
Totally.
Yeah.
Is the energy side what you see clients, is that their biggest benefit, is having more energy to do their daily activities?
Yes. For lack of a better term, yes. I think that I see a lot of guys who struggle throughout the course of their day. Maybe they're working a 9 to 5, and then they come home and like they have zero in the gas tank for their family. They have zero in the gas tank for extra workouts. Like they're coming home and it's just like that's all that they have left. And so if we're able to tap into that, plus you add in coinciding, it's got to take place with the diet, the sleep, the supplementation. If all those things start dialed in, at the end of the day, it's a better quality of life. It's not about looking like Ronnie Coleman for a lot of guys on TRT. And that's one thing I think people get misconstrued, is that you're going to go on TRT and blow up to look like an IFBB Pro. And it's not going to be the case when you're doing doctor supervised.
Likely not going to happen.
Likely not happen unless you got Ricky's genetics.
Or supposedly Hormone.
Oh, that dude, yeah.
Supposedly runs a very low level of test.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard he even misses doses of that.
Really?
Yeah, like he'll just forget about doing it and taking it.
So that is one of the cool thing about pellet therapy is you don't forget it. Mm-hmm. Because it's just in there.
Yeah.
For I think 6 months.
You think?
I think 4 to 6 months. Yeah.
So I think it's definitely becoming less taboo, and for good reason. I think there's a lot of stuff out there. We're just finding a weird uphill battle.
Who's the first person that you remember, first like celebrity figure that somebody was talking about openly being on TRT?
Are we talking like, and that's the difference too of like medically supervised TRT or people that were on TRT that looked, that were like a IFBB Pro bodybuilder. But I don't know about that, because I feel like it was completely mum for people to talk about it, right? You can't be sponsored by Optimum Nutrition and be claiming that your results are from steroids. No, it's because of the creatine and the protein powder. So for a long time,
the amino acids, man.
BCAAs. For a long time, they couldn't talk about that. And then you started getting to the point, I think it was like Seth Feroce, Rich Piana, where you started hearing some of those guys actually being more transparent about what goes on in the fitness industry, what goes on in professional sports, because like it or not, your favorite professional athlete probably has or is on some type of performance enhancing drug, whether that's metabolic modulators, hormonal stuff. Hate to break it to you, but professional sports, it's there, whether they get bobbed for it or not.
You mean when they're signing $50 million contracts, they're taking every edge they possibly can to remain competitive?
Yeah, you're telling me that LeBron has continued to get better over the course of a couple of decades of his career, and bounce back from injuries and stay healthy.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just Superman.
Just a freak of nature.
So the first person I think, honestly, I don't know about clinical HRT, but I know that's like Seth Feroce. Listening to his YouTube stuff was kind of the first open one about that. And now it's probably only been in the last 5 years that I've really seen people openly talking about medically supervised hormone replacement therapy, because I really don't think that clinics were really a thing. You had to go through your primary doctor, and that was a really hard thing to do. Like, you had to have somebody that was open to doing that, or you had to be 60 years old, or you were just getting it from somebody's homemade supply, calling it TRT. So I think since kind of the invention of like your Merrick Health, Transcend, Core Medical, these companies that now provide specific testing for that, medical supervision over hormonal therapies. I can't really say when the first time I heard about that. What about you?
I think so. Not necessarily the first time I heard about TRT, but the first time I remember hearing somebody openly talk about being on TRT was Joe Rogan. I feel like he was one of the big pushers in the space, at least that I was exposed to, that was one of the first ones to start talking about it.
I would have to agree with that. Yeah.
And that felt like that was a long time ago. Maybe it was like that 5-year mark or so.
Yeah.
Probably would have been about right.
And the thing is that it's always kind of been there, right? I'm sure when you were young, even the thought process of boosting your testosterone via supplementation or these things, like we always were somewhat pursuing that. Whether it was actually effective, most of the time probably wasn't, because you were buying placebo pre-workouts and stuff that were like Andro Rush, Bullnox pre-workouts, or you were taking Tribulus, or...
We didn't know if Lauren should take the B-Nox Andro Rush.
Really?
Thought it might be too much testosterone for her, yeah.
So it's to some extent it's always been there. Like, I think it's just a thing with dudes in the gym. And we're in a weird phase in the fitness industry with SARMs and all these things coming out where...
We should probably chat on SARMs for a little bit.
Yeah. So, SARMs, what would you be your definition of that?
Selective androgen receptor modulators, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what it at least stands for. The way I would kind of describe it to somebody that has zero experience with it is it a pro hormone that's not as bad for you, essentially? Or it's similar? Like, there used to be, like GNC would sell, were they pro hormones?
At a certain point, they were selling
some sketchy stuff, right?
There was like the designer steroid phase where you were essentially buying pro hormones that were, yes, methylated pro steroids. And then they went to kind of like the 1-andros, the 4-andros before people kind of realized what they were doing. And those are still around, like the DHEA precursors. Yeah. But before, it was pretty much oral steroids. Yeah.
So when did SARMs kind of hit the more mainstream?
They've been around for a long time.
Okay.
I think that's where like the bodybuilding scene behind Trend, for example, is technically a SARM.
Really?
Yes. It's technically a SARM because it's selective in what it does. So with the selective androgen receptor modulator, what the thesis behind it was you were going to get all the anabolic and muscle building effects without the androgenic masculinizing effects that steroids have, like hair loss, jawbone growth, deepening of the voice. So,
all the quote-unquote side effects other than the muscle building.
Because they were originally studied, which most steroids are, clinically for muscle wasting disease, people that had these different disorders where they needed some medical intervention to keep muscle on, but they didn't want them looking like female bodybuilders, especially for women. And they're not FDA approved. They never played out in the clinical data. There's still a few of them, I believe, like RAD 140, Ostarine potentially, that are still in conversations or being used in studies, but majority of the SARMs were thrown out clinically because it didn't match on paper. You wanted certain things that were anabolic but weren't going to shut down your own natural testosterone production, or didn't cause hair loss, some of the masculinizing properties. In the real world, though, a lot of those things didn't end up working out. It's still going to shut down your natural hormones without replacing it, which is what TRT does. And so you get low testosterone effects without replacing it. Obviously, they build some muscle mass. They're oral. You don't have to put a needle in. And that's where we get a lot of the misinformation, and we get these teenagers that are using something that, yeah, you're going to get some results from it, but the side effects and the potential for shutting down your own balls and shutting down your own hormonal production is also a potential side effect.
That's a big side effect.
It's a big side effect. Yeah, it's almost just, instead of people going with the real stuff, that's where people have taken it. So
just because it's oral does not mean that it's safe.
yeah, and compared to, like, let's say D-bol or some of these oral steroids, there's less, let's say, organ toxicity, but there's no long-term data on any of this stuff. We've got data for the last 50 plus years on testosterone. Like, people know what it's going to do. There's people that have lived, honestly, into their 70s and 80s up to this point. We have the data on what that's going to do. Like the bioidentical hormones like that and growth hormone. Like, we've got a lot of data on that. We've seen how it works in clinical settings. Obviously, on with the fitness industry and the bodybuilding side, movie stars of things. But for some of this fringe stuff that's out there, we don't know what it's going to do to you in 30 years. So you're rolling the dice by messing with some of these things for sure.
And it's not like it's a huge payoff either.
No.
You're just rolling the dice for a little bit more gains.
Yeah. So not recommended at all.
SARMs not recommended.
Not recommended. I get a ton of high school baseball players, college baseball players that come to me with those questions.
That has to be the majority of who's coming to you with those questions, right?
Yes. That, and especially an MK677.
That's a popular one. I was actually going to ask you about that. That's similar to growth hormone, right?
So it's put in the same classification as SARMs,
okay,
but it is not a SARM. It's a growth hormone secretagogue. So it's working within your body on your pituitary to increase more growth hormone. But it's not just working on your growth hormone receptor. It's increasing your hunger hormone called ghrelin. And then as the ghrelin increases, you're also getting a significant bump up in IGF, insulin-like growth factor, and growth hormone. So you're going to get some of those benefits. It's not directly anabolic. There's going to be a lot of water retention that comes with that. There's a huge hunger increase that comes with that, which is why it's appealing to skinny high school athletes. But on the flip side of that, anytime you're messing with growth hormone, IGF-1, and blood sugar, you could become pre-diabetic or diabetic because of it. So that's the thing, is that you get these kids that we're going to go on something that's going to increase your appetite. You're going to eat like shit and eat a bunch of carbohydrate-dense meals and potentially give yourself pre-diabetes or diabetes. So that is one of the side effects of that. I think there is probably some clinical uses for MK677, but there's no free rides in the body.
No free rides. Yeah, MK677?
Yeah.
Rad 140, Austrian, and LGD 4030 or something.
Yeah.
Those are like the four that I remember because I looked into it for a little bit and kind of came to the same conclusion that you've sort of been talking about, where it's just like, are they safer? Maybe, but there's also just not really any results to go off of or any actual clinical studies.
Yep.
Or not a ton to go off of, and definitely no long duration studies. They just haven't been around that long.
No. And obviously, everybody talks about this thing of the FDA and the medical world, pharmaceuticals, abandon things if it's not profitable. There had to have been enough side effects compared to the benefits that you would get for them to abandon it. If it would have been that great, they probably would have kept continuing on with the courses. Like, they have nothing to gain by abandoning pharmaceuticals. So for even like the FDA to abandon these things and say that they are not going to be as beneficial relative to some of the other anabolic agents that they could use in clinical settings, because they're not taking bodybuilders or Olympic athletes and putting them through these test trials. It's burn victims, muscle wasting disease, and that should set off some red flags there. Because every time you're buying these things, it's from a gray market source. You're not buying these prescribed. So that's the gist on SARMs.
That is the gist on SARMs.
But peptides, that's an interesting one.
So I have almost zero experience with peptides across the board. I'm familiar with BPC 157, and that's it. So I'm excited to do a little learning on the peptides.
Yeah. And so again, these are not recommendations, medical advice. And honestly, if you are an athlete and you are in a tested federation, you just need to stay away from this stuff. It's never going to play out if you can't use these things long term, and that's about all I have to say on that aspect. But peptides, interesting field, I think, of research and study, because peptides are essentially just chains of amino acids, right?
Okay.
Certain things like BPC 157 are naturally found within your gastric system, your gastric juices in the stomach. And some of these peptides, relatively typically low side effects, and they're usually working on, so like there's the growth hormone secretagogues, there's ipamorelin, CJC, and ceramorelin. They all do different things, but at the end of the day, upregulating your body's own growth hormone pathways, improving sleep, skin quality, all the things you would kind of look at from exogenous growth hormone, but it's not shutting down your own production like just taking growth hormone was. So you can try to ramp up, tell your brain to make more growth hormone, which from a recovery standpoint, injury standpoint, as you age, you naturally just start decreasing in growth hormone production, which is why, it's so big. Probably most of Hollywood takes growth hormone. Most of the anti-aging community takes growth hormone. So if you can do that with less side effects, you're not shutting down your own pathways, maybe less of the blood sugar risk, diabetes risk with some of those things, that's where some of those growth hormone peptides can come in. Obviously, you've got the healing peptides like your BPC 157, your TB 500. Like BPC is going to be working on angiogenesis, so blood flow, increasing blood flow, new blood vessels, ramping up your collagen system, and that's why they call it like the Wolverine peptide. So there's oral, there's injectable measures of that, and for my clients who are not athletes, collegially, professionally, or high school, I've actually recommended BPC and TB 500 on quite a few occasions, going through clinics, because I think up until recently you could get that at your local clinics. You could go get peptide therapies like BPC.
Really?
Yeah.
So something changed recently?
FDA coming down on it, and there are always going to be control on these things. I do think, though, that for people that are struggling, chronic injuries, you've been told that your only course of action is going to be maybe surgery. If it was me personally, that would be a route that I would look into if I was middle-aged, had a shoulder injury, and all they were telling me was, obviously, if you got your torn rotator cuff, maybe a little bit different story, but if it's just a nagging injury, I think that some of these peptides could be pretty profound for getting you back up to speed and a better quality of life. It's not a long-term solution. Like, you're taking these things for a few weeks to maybe a few months, and then you're taking a break from it. But
do you have any cases where you've seen good results from BPC 157?
So from myself personally, I've taken it, yes.
In what scenarios?
My hip, when I tore my labrum, my hip labrum, inflammation, pain significantly reduced. I do think that it definitely was working on that systemically. I've got some old nagging injuries. Part of my quad's not attached. Obviously, my hip. I think I probably have both hips torn to some extent. Probably some meniscus stuff in my knees. So I use it personally now, just where I'm at, not being an athlete at this point, a couple times per year. I'll run a course of it. For people that have GI issues, so gut, like let's say leaky gut, IBS, Crohn's, things like that. Oral BPC supplementation is actually most commonly used for people with gut issues. And so we've got a couple clients that nothing has helped. They've gone to gastro doctors, consulted, done stool tests, all this stuff. Nothing has really moved the needle for them outside of BPC therapy.
Wow.
So some pretty pronounced benefits, speculative, with like healing the gut lining, obviously creating a better gut environment. So I do think that those things have a lot of benefit. I think there's more studies that need to be done, but some of these things, when you're only getting one answer from a doctor, I'm an experimenter to some extent, knowing that the case profile is, looking at how many people have done that. Obviously, if you can get it from your local clinics, doctor supervised, that's the best way to go. About you?
Always a good thing to have some supervision. I have not messed with BPC 157.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not opposed to it. I just haven't really had a good use case for it, I guess.
Yeah. Which, and if you don't have to take something, probably shouldn't just do it.
Probably not just to do it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, TRT, HRT, the peptide therapies.
Should we go into, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but some of your go-to supplements or things that you supplement?
Yeah. So let's kind of stick on the theme of like natural hormone supplementation. Did you do any of that stuff previous to going on TRT, like your Tongkat leaves or anything like that?
No, the closest thing would be ashwagandha.
Yep.
That's it though. I didn't really try.
The Huberman stack.
What is the Huberman stack?
So, from a testosterone standpoint, it's the Fidogia, Agrestis, and Tongkat Ali. You got all these companies now that are, this is like not in any way affiliated with Huberman, but they're like, hey, this is what he talked about in his podcast. Yep. And so I would imagine if you had bought in stock in that in the last 2 years, you'd be doing pretty well in Tongkat Ali and Fidogia Agrestis. Every single company came out with their line of that.
Really?
Yeah. And so this is what these things are doing. Nothing's natural supplementation-wise is directly increasing your testosterone, right? That's one of the issues. If your body's no longer making it, these things aren't going to do squat for you. What most of these things are doing, like Tongkat and Fidogia, is they're increasing in your brain.
Is that two things or is that one thing?
Two different things.
Okay.
They work on similar things though, and they're usually taken together.
Okay.
I think it's just the Huberman thing. Like that was just, the stack is Tongkat Ali, which is one, and then Fidogia.
Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of times if you get like a testosterone boosting supplement, there's usually like 2 to 5 things in it, right? But what those things specifically are doing is they're going to do a mild increase in your fertility hormones, so LH and FSH in your brain. And then it travels down the axis, your HPTA, and it's going to, as a byproduct, maybe increase your testosterone at the end of that circuit, right? So it's got to go through one thing to go to another thing, and then so it's not directly just increasing testosterone, which is most people think. Ashwagandha is another one. That's been studied to have some benefit, but it's doing that by reducing cortisol. You decrease cortisol and stress, testosterone might go up a little bit. So circling back, some of the things that I use just for support. I don't like to call them testosterone boosting because they don't directly boost it. It's more of support with those things. Shilajit is one that I use. So it's a multi-mineral complex that comes from like the Russian mountains or the Himalayan mountains. It's got fulvic acid in it. There's been a few studies done specifically on Prima-V Shilajit with increase in mitochondrial health, which as a byproduct, you're going to get a little bit of testosterone support and exercise boost. So it's a natural energy booster. For me personally, I take it every single morning. Can help with some like heavy metal detox from fluoride and some of the things you drink for your water. So I just put it in there. So that's one thing. I take the Tongkat and the Fidogia. I take boron and ashwagandha are kind of the main things from like a support panel that I take. And also there's some byproducts of like Tongkat is working on like your dopamine system. So there's a little bit of like a dopamine spike, energy spike, which is probably what most people are feeling when you take these supplements. It's like, oh, I feel it. Well, it's also probably increasing your dopamine, so that's probably what you're feeling versus your testosterone shot up through the roof.
Right.
So, outside of that, just in terms of supplementation, I use daily. I use a multivitamin, quality multivitamin, a couple of times per week. I think that if you're talking about hormone support, we got to talk about your zinc, your magnesium, your B vitamins. Like those things are the taxi system in your body for making hormones, created neurotransmitters. So just to top off my levels, make sure I'm getting enough micronutrients in. That's in there. I take magnesium every single day at night. I take usually some type of sleep complex, sleep aid.
Melatonin or no melatonin?
I've gotten away from melatonin most of the time. I used to be melatonin every single night for probably 2 years, 3 years. And I've gotten away. I use it sparingly now. Mainly when I'm traveling, changing time zones to get my circadian rhythm back in check, or if I'm getting sick because it's really strong antioxidant. So I've actually seen like on people's Whoop straps when they track like their heart rate variability, 2 to 3 nights of high dose melatonin. Again, not medical advice, but we usually see the heart rate variability after somebody gets the C word or some other type of sickness or illness is usually back up into the 90%, and the recovery rates are back up after using melatonin. But outside of that, there's probably 15 to 20 other things that I use as needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give us like the top 2 or 3, the as needed.
The as needed ones would be nootropics. So we're just
down.
We're going to let that be. Nootropics, some things like rhodiola. So if I got a crappy night's worth of sleep, if I need to have a podcast day where I'm cognitively sharp, I'll take some things like paracetams or like Noopept or some of these nootropics that are a little bit higher. I'll usually take them in a complex, not individual ones, but lion's mane, Bacopa.
I think I need to get back into the nootropic game. I've been off of most of the nootropics minus just whatever happens to be in a ghost energy drink for
The thing is, though, it's almost that, like, that gets you enough. And even in that, like alpha GPC, great nootropic that's in there. Acetyl L-carnitine, great nootropic that's also in that. So, I mean, you're probably getting enough of what you need from something like that or in a pre-workout. I guess there's a few other things I didn't mention. So I take fish oil every single day, omega-3s, and I completely spaced. What about you? What are some things that you're taking daily that move the needle for you?
Not nearly as many as you are. I just switched from the ashwagandha that I was getting to one that has like a couple other things in it. And it's...
what are those things?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I'd have to check. I take ashwagandha, vitamin D3 and K2, multivitamin, fish oil, and I take Burnout in the evenings by Carbon Fiber.
Gotcha.
And that's it right now. I'm sorry. I do take creatine, protein, and pre-workout.
Yeah. Creatine was the other one. Daily creatine for me, non-negotiable.
I kind of forget about the creatine. My pre-workout has a full serving of creatine in it. So if I don't take the pre-workout, I have my creatine there.
So I'm actually pretty bullish on more than 5 grams of creatine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, logically speaking, if it's stored in the muscle and you've got more muscle mass, you'd probably benefit from more than 5 grams.
You would think so, right?
And there's a lot of data coming out now. We studied the muscle building hydration benefits of that, but there's actually a lot of studies being done now on creatine for your brain.
Oh, yeah.
For like prevention of like neurodegeneration for Alzheimer's, Parkinson, and over 5 grams for that. Like, because, you'll hit the muscle saturation point if you want to have extra, because your brain does store creatine. You probably need to be up in that 10 to 15 gram per day range.
I'm going to up the dose.
Right? I'm
going to up the dose and see what happens.
Alzheimer's.
That would be good.
That would be good. Some other things on a as-needed basis. I like this theory called PM priming, to where, like, the end of the day, I think we all struggle with getting out of work mode, fight or flight, late evening workout, putting some things in there that'll help me calm down. Like magnesium is usually in there. And we're talking like between 5 and 7 p.m. before you go into bed, but it's in the bloodstream. getting you chilled out, getting the nervous system switched so that you're ready for bed, not just trying to take melatonin when you're trying to go to sleep and then you lay there for another 30 minutes. So that apigenin is one. It's a flavonoid that comes from celery, another Huberman thing that was made popular. But like it attaches to the GABA and benzo receptors. Okay. So there's some sleep benefits that come from that, but it's not going to knock you out. Phosphatidylserine blocks cortisol. Kava, Kana, those are two herbs that people can use as like alcohol substitutes because they have that like stress relieving property. So if people don't want to drink alcohol, you could do something like that, and it's going to feel like a nice calm buzz almost, but you're not going to get the side effects or the downfalls of alcohol. So
and that's Kava?
That's Kava. So there's actually, it's a Pacific Island root that they use. They make it into a drink there, and they drink it recreationally, kind of like alcohol.
Really?
When we were down in Florida a couple years ago, there's actually Kava bars popping up where you can go and you get Kava. And it's kind of like a glass of wine in terms of like what you feel like, but it's not impacting your motor skills. So you can drive, you can be fine. It's literally just working on a lot of the same neurotransmitters of like GABA. That's what alcohol does. That's why you feel calm and you feel good. But it doesn't have a lot of the toxic aspects that come with that.
Kava could be huge. How long has that been around then? It's been around forever?
It's more popular I'd say the last 5 years more popular. They have cans of it and stuff like sparkling Kava drinks now you can buy off of Amazon. Wow. So I've got some clients who are trying to stop drinking, and we'll have them do that Kava. You know, it's not going to be alcohol. If you're getting messed up on the weekends, a couple Kava drinks aren't going to do it for you. But
what about 10?
You might have some organ problems, maybe. That's what I think one of the things they say is at high enough dosages, maybe you might start getting some kidney or liver issues. I don't know. But I'm not taking that much all the time. I'll have like a couple of Kava pills if I do it. But again, tools in the toolbox. You want something that's a substitute for that. You want to reduce some stress. Why not look at something like Kava?
A little bit of Kava.
A little bit of Kava. Yeah, we'll have to get a Kava at some point. There's got to be a Kava bar in Kansas City somewhere.
I've never heard of a Kava bar.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get some Kava drinks and we'll try them.
Maybe we'll try them on the podcast. We'll see where it ends up after 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, because it's not like you're drunk, but it's calming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's probably a bunch of other things that are escaping my brain that it really comes, and that's what I do, is like looking at what is the need for somebody and where does that fit into your life? What are things either on your blood work that are showing us that we need to put something in? Vitamin D3, K2. What are symptoms that you might have, whether that's libido, whether that's energy throughout the course of the day? If somebody comes to me and they're like, terrible energy throughout the course of the day, we'll probably put something in like L-tyrosine. Amino acid, right? But it's a precursor to L-dopa and dopamine. So putting in something like that. It's a tool in the toolbox that if somebody that doesn't struggle with energy, they probably don't need that. Somebody might need some L-theanine because they're ramped up too much and they need, a little bit of a cortisol drop or some ashwagandha, things like that. So there's certain things where it's like most people need magnesium, specifically since we're going off the topic of men. Most men would benefit from magnesium, some type of vitamin and mineral support, especially if your diet's off from like a zinc perspective, vitamin D, K2. You're probably not getting many of those in from your diet. Fish oil, because you're probably not eating a ton of fish. Those baseline things, when I work with people, are usually things that go in there. But then from there, everything else is as needed.
I love it.
Yeah, man.
You have a much more vast tool belt of supplements than I do.
The thing is I just find it entertaining. I don't know why. I just always have. Like, I think it's cool that if there's a specific issue that you can target, and most people don't know, a lot of people don't know about it, but there's probably something out there that could be solving the problem that you have. Maybe it's pharmaceutical, because there's a lot of that stuff, like there's Russian peptides. There's things that they use over there and they have for decades that we don't have over here. Like there's neuropeptides. There's two that are called Simax and then Selenk. Selenk is very like anxiolytic. They both like increase neuron growth in your brain. So BDNF, they increase that. Selenk is getting much more like a calming peptide. Cmax is much more focus, cognition. But there's all these things that are a little more like almost pharmaceutical based, which people could benefit from, versus maybe your traditional pharmaceuticals. Probably going to get canceled because of that.
Probably.
But there's a lot of things in a natural setting that probably the better to look at first step wise before you jump to things maybe like statins. All about statins. If you need them, you got a family history of doing that. But if it's lifestyle related, because you're overweight and your diet sucks, look into some things like red rice yeast. However, red yeast rice, I think it's red yeast rice extract. Essentially, it works on the same pathways as statins do, or some things like citrus bergamot. Like I think people kind of overlook what these things can do. And
what does citrus bergamot do?
Citrus bergamot is going to be LDL support, raising up HDL, so your good cholesterol, lowering down triglycerides. So again, they're kind of working on some of the similar pathways as like statins. I find with like natural supplements, you're not going to get equal benefits one for one compared to a pharmaceutical. Supplements, I mean, across the board are essentially shitty drugs. A lot of them are working on like the same pathways, and people are like, "Oh, I take supplements." Well, it's working along the same line of things as pharmaceuticals do, probably just a lot weaker.
Yeah.
So you probably need to
diluted.
use a combination of things and hit the target from multiple angles, like a testosterone complex. You'd probably be better off taking Fedogia, Tongkat, Shilajit, and ashwagandha versus just ashwagandha from that. You know, by targeting, lowering your stress levels, increasing fertility hormones, increasing your cellular health. You're probably going to get a better end product because of that. Because there's probably not one thing out there that's going to boost your metabolism, lower your cortisol, lower your cholesterol to the extent that you need it to if you're looking for intervention.
What can people do if they're trying to learn from you as far as what they should be taking, or what does that process look like? Do you help people through that, or?
Yes. So we either do coaching where we're going to commit to a certain amount of months for these things, and I'm going to be in your back pocket. We're hopping on calls weekly. We're dialing in everything from looking at your blood work. We're looking at what your lifestyle is, what your sleep is, and I'm analyzing all those things, and then the relationships between them. You know, why is one of these markers high when another one of these markers is high? What's the relationship between them? What's going to be the solution? You know, we're going to tie you in with professionals if needed, if there's medical interventions that need to happen. We're going to dial in specifics of your diet. So a lot of people, they don't know what their macros should be. They're maybe tracking macros based on what a calculator spit out that's not doing it for them. And so I come in and we're going to look at how do we tie in your macros to the specific foods that you enjoy eating, the food that you should be eating to that combination to then get you to where your goal is going to be. Because usually there's a disconnect somewhere along the lines with people. You know, that's why I say calculators aren't coaches. You might be spot on with your number from MyFitnessPal. You know, if you're a hard charging athlete training 3 times a day, that could be completely off just based on your height, weight, and age. And then we have a consulting side of things where we can sit down for an hour. You know, I have a lot of people that come to me and they're like, analyze my blood work for 60 minutes. And I sit down, we create a game plan. They come back to me every couple months when they get their blood work done, and it's less coaching calls per week, less looking at all the metrics, and I'm just giving them an hour worth of my time.
I love it.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's a big need for it, dude. It's kind of crazy. The shape of the world we're in, and as much knowledge as we have, everybody knows about macros. Everybody has a gym membership, yet we keep getting sicker and unhealthier.
Crazy, isn't it?
I think and that's where I think it's coaching is not just about the knowledge of it, about fitness or supplements or that. How do you apply it, and how do you stick to something?
Knowing and doing are 2 very different things.
The accountability portion, especially when it comes to something like diet or supplementation, because most people suck at that aspect. It's easy to go to the gym. It's easier. It's not easy, but how many people do you know that have said, I've got a great diet, but my training sucks? Not many. It's
I
most
don't know
of the
if I've
time.
ever heard that.
Yeah. Most of the time, it's my training is great.
Yeah.
My diet, my sleep sucks.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what I do, and that's what I'm doing now. And there'll be renditions of that, and the ultimate goal is impacting people, help them change their lives.
I love it. Help them have more energy to do the things that they want to do.
That's what it's about, man.
Accomplish whatever their goals are.
That's what it's about.
And that's kind of where it starts too, is with health. Because if you don't have your health, if you don't have your energy, then cascading spiral of negatives from there.
I always come back to that of like, it's so easy at this point in life to let the other things fill up your schedule, and that comes first and foremost. But when it starts doing that, it tends to start suffering if you start slacking on your workouts, your sleep, getting outside, going on walks, doing all those things. Like for me, it's like, man, it seems counterintuitive because my list of things that need to get done is so long. But it's going to be twice as productive if I take this time to go work out, to get outside, to get good sleep. It's just, we all work backwards with those things. Most people do anyway, right? That's why you got people that are very successful professionally, but then they look back and it's something starts falling apart because they just let their health go to shit during that process.
Yeah, you keep the blinders on too long, eventually something's going to fall apart.
100%.
I enjoyed this, though, as kind of a fire hose of knowledge.
A little bit.
With the supplementation, which I always like picking your brain on that stuff.
Yeah, I enjoy talking about it.
I'm sure we'll be talking about it again.
Probably.
That was the Forging Alpha podcast. Caleb, do you have anything else to add?
Nothing about encompasses it. Yeah, unless you got any other questions. But if you do have questions, reach out, DM, Instagram, reach out to us, Caleb at GameTimeNutrition.net. You can find my phone number on Instagram and on the website as well. I'll catch you on the flip side.
We'll see you guys later.
Peace.